Okay, we're on. Hi, greetings everyone. Welcome to sort of an impromptu version of Paranormal Radio that we're doing tonight. We're actually taping this show. Well, we're not really taping it, we're doing live. This is Facebook Live. We're doing this, and this is actually from the clubhouse at the Heritage One Apartments in Elsa. That's where I live now. This is where my residence is. I don't live in the clubhouse, but I live in the compound. And we're actually doing that here. We're kind of doing this because this month we didn't have a taping of Paranormal Radio. Mr. John DeVita, that runs the show, produces our show, and directs it over there, he had a little bit of knee surgery done. He's recuperating from that. So when I did the show in November, I kind of mentioned that we may or may not be doing the December show, and it wound up we're not because he's going through a little bit of recovery for that. Hopefully in January, a little closer to the end of the month, we'll schedule another show and we'll pick the show back up regularly. We do once a month with Paranormal Radio, and thank you to all of the people that listen to it. Thank you very much for that. Hope everyone is enjoying their Christmas season. This is December, what is today? No, not the 15th.
17th.
17th today. Why, I lost a couple of days. Today's December 17th, so we don't have long to go. What is it, like 5 more days till Christmas?
It's a few more. Try 8.
Yeah, that's right, because this is Tuesday, so it's next week, Wednesday. So we've got so 8 days we've got till Christmas, so hopefully you're all doing your shopping, you're getting your wrapping done, you're getting your tree decorated, all that kind of stuff, and maybe now is your time to relax, look at your Facebook page and watch the show here. Maybe we give you a little entertainment. What I decided to talk about tonight, not really knowing what we were going to do or if we were even going to do this, was sort of an impromptu thing. So I decided to talk about ghosts in the White House, and then I'll give the story of the Christmas tree ship, which is sort of a Christmas tree ship local to the Chicago area here. Talk about that, and a little bit of things that go on with that. And then I've got a couple of old recordings to play too. One would tie in with the White House. It's an old recording of Adelina Patti, who used to be a very famous opera star in the 19th century. But she did make it into the recording era, which was a little more modern, and she did make a few recordings in 1905, and then she died finally in 1919. So we do have a few recordings of her voice, but you got to listen to it. It's a little bit to be judged with because she made these recordings when she was in her 60s. But the reason this would tie in with the White House, because she sang in the White House when she was a teenager for the Lincolns, when the Lincolns were in residence in the White House. So, I think we did some of the announcements there. We've got some of it done. Oh, and I just would like to thank Mr. John Chiconda, too, that's doing this for us and producing this and putting this all together and everything. He works all day and everything, and he came here this evening at 8 o'clock actually came earlier to set up all the equipment and get this set up and that, and get us going with that, so we have a show for the month of December here.
We still have 3 minutes
I got
till
3 minutes.
show time, so we're just...
I thought I was doing the show. So
yeah, you were...
I thought I was doing the show.
We're a little ahead.
This is the pre-show.
This is the pre-show, so tell some jokes or...
So we're doing that, so everybody, if you got anybody that would like some questions, not only about the subjects I'm going to be talking about, which would be White House and haunts in the White House, and then also to the Christmas tree ship here in Chicago. Any questions in general you may have about paranormal or that, let us know here on Facebook, and then we'll try our best to give you an answer.
We'll pick up the comments, and hopefully if there's questions in the comments, they should scroll across my screen. I haven't seen anyone check in as yet. But,
and if I don't know the answer to your question, I'll just make up something. It'll sound real good, and you'll never know the difference.
Right.
That's how I do it. So that's that. There goes our light. We've been having trouble with this light up here too. This light, John decided to set up here because the lighting would be nicer, and we flipped the light on. But this light has been flipping off and on us, and sometimes one bulb will come on, and it's a little dimmer. And right now it's real nice and bright. We have both of the lights on it.
So that's,
if this sort of fades or something, it's nothing paranormal going on. It's just something with the electric and the light here.
I don't know. Maybe it is. There's some message coming from somebody that's telling us.
Yeah.
That we're interesting.
People always think like ghosts and hauntings, that kind of thing, not really appropriate for Christmas. But I always use the example. He says, now you got to remember, one of the most beloved stories for the Christmas season, A Christmas Carol, you've got 4 ghosts in that one.
Right
there. So that's like a big storyteller, a big thing, and it's been filmed.
Greatest. Our director, and I was just in the Christmas Carol performances, introduces the show as the greatest ghost story ever told.
Yeah. Many people lose that one in trivia. They say, how many ghosts are in Christmas Carol? And people say 3.
Right.
Past, present, and future. But they always forget Jacob Marley.
Right.
Yeah, Jacob Marley's the first ghost you see there. Yeah, in the film versions of it, usually he's a door knocker.
His face
appears, and then and then eventually he comes into the house, into Scrooge's bedchamber. rattling his chains.
Yeah.
People always ask too. They says, "Why does he have that tie around his head?" He's got that tie. That was a very common thing they used to do in burials years back because what would happen is if they didn't tie that, a lot of times from the nerves, your jaw would drop.
Oh.
And in one of the film versions, they actually show that where he takes it off and his mouth just goes really down. It's really gross looking, like the whole thing swings real down. So that would happen. So a lot of times that's why they used to tie people like that, and then put coins over the eyes too, because your eyes would pop open.
Right.
So they put coins over your eyes, and they would put a binding around your head like that. So
My favorite version of the Christmas Carol story is Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol.
oh, Magoo,
The
You haven't
cartoon,
done it again.
Charlie, but
They don't show Mr. Magoo's cartoons too much anymore because they say, politically correct. He makes fun of people that are silent there.
well, yeah,
It's sort of a way of.
yeah.
And then his little assistant that he had too. Was it his assistant or houseboy? He had a Chinese houseboy, and he's
houseboy,
very
right,
stereotypical.
right.
So that's why Mr. Magoo's cartoons and things aren't shown too much anymore. Yeah.
But I wanted
Magoo,
the
you've
quick
done
story.
it again.
The quick story I wanted to share about, and one of the reasons why it's my favorite. Of course, it's the Mr. Magoo Christmas Carol. It's a cartoon that came out in the '60s. It was an hour broadcast, so it's about 50 minutes of actual film time. But the story was scored by Julie Stein, who was a Broadway composer and lyricist who had worked on the Broadway shows Funny Girl, Gypsy, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And very beautiful.
Oh, she wrote the musical scores for those.
Right.
Scores for those.
Right,
three.
right.
Okay. I
So-
didn't know that. Okay.
But anyway, we should go live now. It's 8:00, and you can start your broadcast
Okay.
of Paranormal Radio for December.
Here we go. Welcome to Paranormal Radio, December 17th. It's kind of a chilly evening, so hopefully you're sitting someplace warm in your house there, cozy, and just looking at your computer, going up on Facebook there and listening to this. Like I said, any questions or comments that you have there, please message them over to us, and we'll do what we can to answer that for you. And like I said, if I don't know the answer, I'll just make something up, and you won't know the difference anyway. Nah, I'm kidding you. If I don't know the answer to something, I'm honest with you. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the White House. Not necessarily because tomorrow we may have a very historic moment coming up in the history of the presidency. There may be an impeachment tomorrow. We don't know how that's going to go, but I'm not going to get political about that. So we just don't know how that's going to go. But what I'm talking about tonight are the ghosts and hauntings in the White House, of which we've got quite a lot. Just to give you a little bit of basic history of the House, every president, we've had 45 of them now, or 44 is it? 45 with Donald Trump. He's the 45th president?
Yes.
I should know this. So 45 presidents, all but one, have lived in the White House, and that would be George Washington, and the only reason he never resided in the House because it simply was not there when he was president. It was planned, and he actually picked out the site for where it was to be constructed and laid the cornerstone. And there is some evidence that he may have actually entered the building during construction to maybe just check on the progress of it, but he never lived there because it was not completed during his term in office, his 2 terms in office. That would have gone to the next first family, which would have been the Adamses. Now, the Adamses have nothing to do with the da-da-da-da, not that Adams family. It's an entirely different Adams family, and they spelled their last name only with 1 D. The haunted Adams family, or the creepy Adams family, spells it with 2 Ds. So that would have been John and Abigail Adams. They would have been the first residents of the White House officially, and that would have been in the year 1800, when the building still was partially completed. Wasn't totally completed yet. There were actually, when they moved in, out of the 32 rooms that would be in the mansion, they were only able to inhabit 6 of them. 6 were actually completed for habitancy. Everything else was still under construction. Plaster was drying, windows were being put in, paint was still wet. There goes our light again, it just flicked back on. Just to let you know what's going on with that. So they were the first ones to move into it, and in actuality, Washington, or the city of Washington City, it was actually called at first. It was called Washington, D.C. later on. Washington City was so far out in the backwoods and the outskirts, nothing was there. John and Abigail Adams got lost actually on their way to the White House finding it. But they did eventually move there and live there, not for his whole term though. They lived there for a partial term of it. And one of the famous stories that comes out of White House history and lore is of Abigail Adams not having any clotheslines or any proper place to hang laundry to dry. anywhere on the grounds, which were still just as incomplete as the inside of the mansion. So she used the East Room, which would later be called the East Room. She called it the Great Drawing Room, or the East Drawing Room. What would it have been? And so in there she strung clotheslines, and that's where she hung her washing to dry. Also, too, it was one of the more warmer rooms in the house. So that's where we actually have our first haunt from. People through the years have been seeing the spirit of Abigail Adams walking through that room, going through the room. Some say she has her arms outstretched as if she's carrying something, carrying a basket or carrying maybe some clothing or something with her. A lot of these stories seem to come to light during the administration of President Taft. Oh, geez, I could see his face and I almost forgot his name. President William Howard Taft. And that would have been right after Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt occupied the White House. And when Theodore Roosevelt was in residence there, he did a lot of major remodeling to the house. And a lot of things were changed. And a lot of major remodeling and redecorating was done. And a lot of times when you do that kind of major work on a residence, you shake things up, and maybe that sort of stirred up some of the spirits. So people noticed the spirit of Abigail Adams. Seems to have been the first time. It was reported before that, too. But a lot of sightings of Abigail were done during the administration of William Howard Taft. Also, too, later during the years, people claim to have seen her. Some actually claim they've seen her walk through one of the walls in the room and go through. Now, people often say, well, why do ghosts walk through walls, or why do ghosts seem to float through the air? In actuality, they're not. If it's a residual haunt, something that's being repeated again, over and over, that type of thing, what they're actually doing is taking the path that they would have taken in life. So, for instance, Abigail Adams walking through a wall. Well, when she was in residency, there could have been a doorway there, or something that she walked through, and that's where she was going, but now it's a solid wall, so she's just taking that path. A ghost that seems to be floating through the air, they're actually ascending a staircase, or coming down a staircase that's no longer there, or has been moved, or whatever. So, different reasons for that. So, anyway, there we have the apparition of Abigail Adams. Our 10th president, Mr. John Tyler, kind of an unlikely candidate for a I shouldn't say even our 10th. Actually, it would have been the gentleman before him. That would have been William Henry Harrison, our 9th president. His spirit, he had a very short term in office, only 30 days he was in office. He gave a 3.5-hour inaugural address out in the rain and caught pneumonia, and 30 days later he died. So he didn't really get to serve much, but he is nonetheless the 9th president and was succeeded by John Tyler for the presidency, our 10th president. William Henry Harrison's ghost, for whatever reason, even though he had a short stay in the house, actually his wife never even got there yet. So his Mrs. Harrison never actually even lived in the house to take up duties as First Lady, even for the short 30 days. But William Henry Harrison's ghost has been seen in the attic of the White House. They go up in the attic and they have this vast storage where there's much furnishings and things from past administration and White House property, and every incoming first family can go up there and look through things and see if there's anything they would like to use, and they'll bring it down and reupholster it or revarnish it and refinish it, and then they can use it in the private family's living quarters. And many families that go up there, or first ladies, whatever, that go up into the attic, claim they see the ghost of William Henry Harrison, for whatever reason, in the attic. We don't know why. Then his successor, the 10th president, John Tyler. Kind of an interesting story about John Tyler. He succeeded to the presidency. He had to fight for it. They didn't want to do it. They wanted to hold an election and elect a president, even though by legal right he was the president, because Harrison died in office. He was the vice president, so he was next in line for it. But he did stick to his guns and show them the Constitution, and yep, he did succeed to it. He was not a popular president, though. They didn't really like him too much, so he's sort of a lame duck. For the time he served, he really didn't get to do a whole lot that he would like to have done. But he does have the distinction of having the largest presidential family. He had 15 children. 15 children from 2 marriages. First wife died, and then he remarried a much younger woman. I forget what her name was. Julia Gardner? I'm not certain. I may be off on that one. Don't catch me on that one. But anyway, the second Mrs. Tyler, he actually proposed to her twice. And then finally the third time she accepted. And he proposed to her in the Blue Room of the White House. And his ghost has been seen in the Blue Room of the White House. Now there's a story about his ghost being seen in the Blue Room, which is rather unusual and a little conflicting, because the ghost was seen by none other than Mary Todd Lincoln when she and her husband were in residence in the White House in the 1860s. And she claimed to see him on a knee down in front of one of the divans, one of the sofas in the Blue Room. And of course that would have been the position he would have taken when he would have proposed to his second wife there. But the problem with her story is she claimed to see his ghost before he was dead. So I don't know if this has ever happened before. I guess there are some stories where there's some sort of a time warp type thing or that, or maybe you can dematerialize and your body can show up in one place as opposed to another. But I don't know why she would say that, but nonetheless she claimed to see him in the Blue Room, but like I say, he was not dead. Another ghost that haunts the Blue Room in the White House is none other than Thomas Jefferson. Although not seen, very much sounds of Mr. Jefferson. They hear violin music come from the Blue Room on occasions, and they attribute it to Thomas Jefferson practicing his violin, because they know he did like to practice his violin in what was then, I don't know what they called it during Jefferson's administration. I don't know if it was officially called the Blue Room yet. A lot of the staterooms with their names, the Blue Room, Green Room, East Room, those names kind of came later on. The earlier administrations had different names for them, or they just used them as a different salon, that type of thing like that. In actuality, in earlier years in the White House, whenever they would hold concerts or have entertainers, singers come in like that, for instance, like when Adeline and Patty sang in the White House, you didn't sing in the East Room as they do now. They didn't have performances there. They had more smaller, intimate performances, and that would have been in the Blue Room. So a lot of functions like that were held in the Blue Room for a select group of people that the President and First Lady would invite there. So Blue Room did have a lot of activity earlier on in early years. So the ghost of, now we have 3 ghosts so far that we mentioned, well actually 4. The sounds of Thomas Jefferson's violin, Abigail Adams haunting the East Room, Mr. John Tyler in the Blue Room. So we have, and then William Henry Harrison up in the attic, up there walking around doing whatever he's doing in the attic of that. Then things seemed to stay kind of quiet in the White House for a few years there, up until the Lincoln years. And then kind of all hell broke loose when the Lincolns took up residency in the White House in the 1860s. What started a lot of this would have been, excuse me, when the Lincolns lost their second son, or their third son it would have been. They had 4 children, Robert being the oldest, and then they had a son, Eddie, who died in Springfield, and then they had 2 sons also when they went to Washington, Willie and Tad, William Wallace Lincoln and Tad Thomas Lincoln. And then Robert. So they would have had the 3 sons during his presidency. And of course, Robert would have been away at school and doing his thing and that, but the 2 younger boys would be in residence in the White House with Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln. And the boys played out in the snow one time in the White House and took sick, and they didn't know what it was. They said it was something they called Potomac fever. It could have been diphtheria, it could have been a touch of cholera from some of the water supply coming into the White House. Don't know exactly what it was, but in any event, well, 2 boys took sick. Well, Tad was able to recover, but the other boy, Willie, didn't recover from the illness. He got worse, and eventually he died. And right after that, a lot of strange activity was happening in the White House. Mrs. Lincoln became very, very much involved with the spiritualist movement in the White House. The spiritualist movement at that time, till mid-19th century, was becoming very popular and was starting to catch on in America. And the feeling behind the spiritualist movement is that you can communicate with loved ones from beyond. That's what the basis of spiritualism is. And Mrs. Lincoln, of course, became very interested in this, having already lost 2 sons. So many mediums and different psychics and different people brought into the White House, all trying to contact the spirit of her deceased son Willie, who she grieved for. She even said herself she sees him in the night. She says, I see Willie, he comes to me, he's at the end of my bed, he speaks to me, I see him. So we don't know if Mrs. Lincoln was dreaming this or she actually did see the ghost of her deceased son. But nonetheless, many seances were held in the White House, and different mediums came in to do these things. And there's one story actually documented where Lincoln attended one of the seances and where a piano in one of the rooms levitated. And Lincoln and 2 of the aides actually sat on the piano and pushed it down and got it back down to the floor level where it did levitate. So we do have some stories about this. Willie Lincoln's ghost actually did turn up in the White House. And the first time we know of this scene is, of course, what Mary Todd Lincoln told us. But then, not the next administration, which would have been the administration of Andrew Johnson after Lincoln's death. He would have been the next president to take over. It would have been the presidency after that, which would have been Grant. Grant became the next president after Johnson. And during the Grant administration, Willie's ghost showed up in the White House. People claimed to see the little boy's ghost in the kitchens, walking up through the hallways, communicated with him. He would ask them things. He'd ask about his pony. He'd ask about his family. He would talk, and then, of course, kind of dematerialize. And that's the first time that ever happened. Mrs. Grant herself actually claimed to see the ghost of Willie Lincoln, and other members of the Grant family claim so. The president himself never made that claim, but other people did. Many first families in the White House have either loved it or hated it, and the Grants were one family that loved the White House. They had a lot of money given to them when they moved into, took up residency for redecorating and refurbishing the mansion, and the Grants did just that. They used it a real high Victorian style and completely redid the East Room with all new chandeliers, new carpets, new fixtures, new everything. It was a little garish looking if you see photos of it. Very patterned floral carpeting, patterned wallpapering, patterned ceilings, heavy velvet draperies, typical Victorian decor for that time. Huge gas-lit crystal chandeliers, monstrous chandeliers, and that all, the style of the time. A lot of the critics of the time even lambasted it. They called it steamboat palace decor. They said the East Room in the White House resembled a salon on an old Mississippi steamboat. So, you can kind of criticize that. But anyway, Mrs. Grant cried on leaving the White House. She loved it so much. Their daughter Nellie was actually married in that room after it was refurbished. She was married in that room in the White House. Okay, so now back to the paranormal again. So we get rid of the Grant administration. Grant leaves the White House. We go on to some other administrations. Next administration, well, one of the next ones to come in would have been the Hayes administration, Rutherford B. Hayes. Mrs. Hayes did not allow alcohol. Her name was Lucy Webb Hayes, and she did not allow alcohol to be served of any kind in the White House, even wine at state dinners. So she took the nickname Lemonade Lucy. The Hayes family was not given a lot of money for redecorating and refurbishing the mansion. So what they did is they pulled a lot of things out of the attic. They did use a lot of furnishings and things from previous administrations, brought those down. And they were somewhat of antiquarians themselves. They did like old furnishings and antiques and that. And a lot of activity seemed to be happening in the Hayes administration. A lot of spirits and things were moving around the White House like that. One of the domestics that worked in the White House for many, many years was Jerry. I forget what Jerry's last name was, but often he's just nicknamed Jerry the Feather Duster, because they do have photos of him. He's an African-American gentleman. And he worked with a feather duster. He dusted not only all the bric-a-brac inside the White House, but windowsills. Because you got to remember, this is in an era before pre-air conditioning days, when windows would have been kept open and dust would blow in and blow out. So you not only had to dust all the furnishings and things inside the house on a daily basis, they also dusted windowsills too. They went around, and that's what Jerry did. And on slow news days, when there wouldn't be a lot of news to report on the White House and on the presidency and whatever was going on with the country, Jerry would often step out and would talk to the reporters and tell them ghost stories about different ghosts that inhabited the house and things that were going on in the White House. Okay, we're going to jump a few more years up again into White House history. And during the administration of Chester Arthur, Chester Arthur kind of came into the presidency accidentally on the death of Garfield. James Garfield would have been assassinated. Chester Allen Arthur would have been the vice president and took it over. Arthur was a widower. His wife Ellen died on him, so he had no first lady when he moved in. One of his nieces or someone took over the duties of first lady. But Arthur was a New York dandy, and he liked all the finest clothes and all the finest furnishings and everything. And on him first touring the White House, when he did a walkthrough tour, he says, "My gosh, this place is so run down, it looks awful. I would never live in it." He says, "It looks like a second-rate hotel." Furnishings were propped up with books, and upholstery was worn out, carpets were frayed, drapes were falling apart. It just really needed a good overhaul. The previous administration, the Garfields, were making the attempt to do some of the redecorating and some work in the house. But then what happened was when Garfield got assassinated, he actually got shot, and he lingered for a long time before he died. So everything was put on hold for about 3 months while he was lingering through his wounds, trying to heal them. They actually even put in a temporary air conditioning system, which was really, this is in the 1880s, and they put in like a very primitive air conditioning, an air-cooled system, because it got so hot and humid in Washington during the summer, and the president was so uncomfortable trying to recuperate from his wounds. They actually found a way with like a water-cooled fan system that they put through to cool down his room, which did work, but it was a very loud motor that ran it, and he didn't like it. So then what they actually wound up doing then was moving him from Washington to a place by a lake, a cooler spot, like a summer home type thing. And then he eventually passed away, and then Chester Arthur took over. So that's why I said White House was in pretty much disrepair by the time Arthur got there. So Arthur did a complete walkthrough of the house and said, okay, we're keeping this we're getting rid of, we're getting rid of that, we're keeping this, we're getting rid of that. So he wound up emptying out a lot of the staterooms, but not happy with that. They also went up into the attic and into storage spaces in the White House and said, clear everything out, get rid of all this stuff. So he had what they call the White House garage sale. 24 cartloads and wagon loads of furnishings. A lot of his stuff went back to the administrations of Adams and Monroe. A lot of historic furnishings just simply got dumped into wagons and carts and taken out and sold flea market style. Got rid of old carpetings, old draperies, lace curtains, old furniture from the East Room, mouse traps, clothing, stuff that was left there. There was some of Lincoln's clothes were left up there that were sold. A lot of White House china, old china from different administrations where there were fragments and pieces and things missing from it that were just stored up in barrels. All the stuff he had carved out and sought for pennies on the dollar. And then he brought in Louis Comfort Tiffany to redecorate everything. That's the first time ever that a professional decorator was brought in to redecorate. So they completely redid the blue room, completely redid the East Room, repainted the ceilings, did everything differently in Tiffany colors, stained glass, a lot of leaded glass over the arched windows on the house, and the crowning glory of the whole redecorating job done by the Tiffany firm was a big screen with eagle and flag motif in the front hall. All done in Tiffany glass, which would be worth a fortune. It was a huge screen. And for many, many years, it was a big tourist attraction. White House guests that would tour would be shown this huge screen. And actually, it served a purpose, though, too. It cut down on drafts, which was kind of the reason why they put it there. Because when you open the front hall doors, like to come in, drafts would just shoot right through the house, and it would get kind of cold. So this screen, this big Tiffany glass screen, sort of kept that down. Here again now too, you did start seeing some haunts and some things going on in the house too, because you started shaking things up with all this sailing and cleaning up and remodeling and redecorating and hammering and repainting and all this going on. So a lot of supernatural things did start occurring again. You did start hearing sounds and seeing things and spirits going on and people being seen in the house that weren't supposed to be there. At times they weren't supposed to be there, and folks walking through walls and through doors that were closed and that kind of stuff. So you did have a lot of paranormal activity happening in the house then. Okay, going to jump up again a few more years now. We're going to go to the administration now of Theodore Roosevelt. When Roosevelt moved into the White House, there again, he did a very major remodeling on it, and he brings in the firm of McKim, Mead and White, and they came in to redecorate and to remodel and cut into beams and make things easier access and move the grand staircase and did stuff. And one of the first things to go, strangely enough, was that huge Tiffany screen, that Tiffany glass screen. First thing that went out, one of the first things to go, and no one knows whatever happened to it. It never wound up into storage. It never wound up. Usually White House property and things like that go into storage and end up back there like that. But that didn't. They don't know what happened. There was a story that it got sold to some hotel in New Hampshire for $200. Other people said it was just taken out simply and discarded and smashed, which I don't know if that would have been done because it was Tiffany glass. That would be worth a fortune today. But no trace of it's ever been found outside of the photos that we do have. Black and white photos, of course. We don't have any color photos of it. Color photography didn't exist at that time. So Theodore Roosevelt did a major remodeling of the White House, and they found the house to be pretty much infested with rats, too. So they had been having problems with that for a long time, especially on the lower levels in the kitchen area and that, where there was the lower levels of the White House always had trouble with rain and with dampness and that kind of stuff like that, especially during heavy rains. It would often flood in that, and it wasn't really too good, the kitchen areas and stuff like that, and they had trouble with rats and rodents because it's an old home. It had been there for a while, and it's also a very public building. A lot of doors are always opening and closing, people are always coming in and out, deliveries and food and things are always coming in, so you would have problems with that. So they brought in all kind of exterminators and things to try to deal with that problem and clean things up like that. And there again, too, during the Roosevelt administration, Theodore Roosevelt claimed to come in contact with the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. He claimed that he felt his presence. He didn't see him, but he actually felt it. He says, I feel the president's here. Sometimes I turn around. I feel that there's someone standing behind me. He felt that president's presence pretty much on the family's quarters up on the second floor in what became the Lincoln bedroom. Okay, Lincoln leaves, or I shouldn't say Lincoln, I was talking about Lincoln's ghost, I said Lincoln. Lincoln's long gone already by this time. So Theodore Roosevelt, of course, leaves office, and then William Howard Taft takes over next, and that's when we have the stories of Abigail Adams' ghost really started surfacing for whatever reason. Abigail Adams' ghost and Andrew Jackson's ghost started showing up. And Andrew Jackson, they would hear a loud laugh, like a real loud cackling laugh, and they had attributed that to Andrew Jackson and to some of his dirty jokes that he liked to tell. He was a very uncouth man. He was not a very refined man, and he was pretty rough around the edges. And Mrs. Lincoln, too, also claimed she heard the voice of Andrew Jackson when she was in the White House, in addition to seeing the ghost of John Tyler, and she said she didn't like it, because she didn't like his manners and she didn't like his speaking. He was a very rude man. So I don't know how much of this is true or not, because we don't know how much sanity Mrs. Lincoln had at this time. But anyway, during the Taft administration, again, we started seeing ghosts and resurfacing with that. Uh, Nothing then for a while. Things kind of stayed quiet until the Coolidge administration. A few years later, a few years down the road, we have the administration of Woodrow Wilson, and then Warren G. Harding, who dies in office, and then Calvin Coolidge takes over as the vice president, being vice president, and he finishes Harding's term, and then he gets reelected and serves another term on his own. And during his administration, First Lady Grace Coolidge, his wife, very, very distinctly saw the ghost of Abraham Lincoln in the Yellow Room. The Yellow Room during Lincoln's time in the White House was used as the family's library. And she claimed to walk in one time and see Lincoln standing, gazing out the windows towards the Potomac, or across the Potomac, with his hands clasped behind his back. And on her entry into the room, she says he turned around, acknowledged her, sort of smiled, and she just saw him just dematerialize and fizzle away. And that was the end of that. Of course, she was very startled by it. She mentioned it to the president, and the president said the same thing too. He says, yeah, there are some ghosts in this darn old house here, something's going on here that we just can't explain. And then for the Lincoln bedroom, with the Lincoln bed in it, actually it wasn't, they call it the Lincoln bed, but he actually never slept in it. It was part of a suite of Victorian furnishings that Mary Todd Lincoln purchased for the White House. But their son Willie did die in that bed. She actually crocheted a bedspread for it. She crocheted a real nice bedspread for the Lincoln bed, which they still have in storage in the White House. They still have the bedspread that Grace Coolidge made for it. And part of the reason I think that Lincoln's ghost may have popped up to Mrs. Coolidge is because the Coolidges kind of went through the same thing that the Lincolns did. They lost a son. They had two sons, and their one son, the two boys were all playing tennis. One boy caught, now I'm talking about the Coolidge boys, John Calvin Coolidge actually got a blister on his foot, and the blister didn't heal, it festered, and it became blood poisoning. It infected his body and killed him. And this was in the 1920s. We didn't have penicillin yet. That was to come a few years later in the 1940s, and antibiotics, and he died from it. So they lost a son in the White House, they lost a child, and the Lincolns lost a child in the White House. And many people think that maybe that's why Lincoln's ghost materialized to Grace Coolidge, because they had that connection of losing a child. Whatever, we don't know. Administration after the Coolidges, we go into the Hoover administration. Nothing too much going on during the Hoover years there, but they did have a fire. Christmas Eve, I think it was, or Christmas Day, 1931 or 32, there was a fire in one of the president's offices up there. A lot of things had to be moved out in papers and things. Nothing really managed to get destroyed, but it was pretty much of an inconvenience. So you did a little fire in the White House. And then, of course, the Hoovers left after 4 years, and then the Roosevelts came in. And when the Roosevelts came in, there again, Lincoln's ghost really started showing up a lot in that White House, particularly on the family quarters on the second floor, and then the Lincoln bedroom. Now, of course, these were the warriors. World War II had been raging, and a lot of people say that Lincoln's ghost pops up when the country's in conflict. And of course, World War II would have been a big conflict. And Winston Churchill, who was Prime Minister of Great Britain, was a very, very frequent guest of the Roosevelts and very frequently stayed in the White House in the Lincoln bedroom. And on one such occasion, there's a very, very famous story where Winston Churchill, Prime Minister Churchill, liked to wear no clothing. And he liked to walk around in his room with no clothes on. So one time he got out of the bath, was walking to the fireplace to get a cigar and have a brandy, and he comes face to face with the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. And he says, Lincoln's ghost turned around, looked at him, smiled, and he said, Mr. President, you seem to have me at a disadvantage. And with that, he said, Lincoln's ghost just dematerialized in front of him, and he never stayed in the room again after that. He moved across the hall to one of the smaller rooms, and he took up his residency there whenever he was a guest of the White House. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands also was a guest at the White House during the war, supporting, drumming up support from the government for the Netherlands, which was occupied by the Nazis at that time. And she stayed as a guest. And one time during the night, she heard a knock on her door. And her maid was unavailable, her personal maid was unavailable to go and answer the door to her room. She would have stayed in the Rose Room, or the Queen's Room, they call it, as a high-ranking female guest. That's where she would have stayed during her stay in the White House. And so she just went and answered the door herself. And as soon as she opened the door, she said she's seen Abraham Lincoln standing there right in front of her, frock coat and top hat, and with that she fainted dead away. And that was it. Came to, of course, we don't know what happened. She just came to on her own and crawled back into bed or whatever she did, but I'm sure it may have caused a very uneasy night for the Queen, coming face to face with the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. But the next day at a state dinner, she did relate the story to the President and to Mrs. Roosevelt, and both of them acknowledged it. Although President Roosevelt claimed he never saw him, but nonetheless did say, now we're talking Franklin Roosevelt, not Theodore Roosevelt, but Theodore claimed to see him too, or feel his presence at least. But Franklin also said, yes, I very much feel the presence of our ghost and of the ghost of Lincoln. Lincoln's presence is very much being felt here. And Mrs. Roosevelt said the same thing, Eleanor Roosevelt. We need to pause or something? You're holding up a finger for me?
Yeah, if your next opportunity.
We got a question?
Get a quick technology break.
Okay. Oh, we're going to take a little break?
Just a few minutes.
Okay, we're
and be
going to stop
back.
for just a moment, take a break, and I'm leaving off with the ghosts in the White House up to the administration of the Roosevelts. So that's what we're going to pick up when we come back. We're back on. Sorry about the little break there. Just needed a little break. He had to do some things with the camera here, change a few things around, and it was a good opportunity for me to get a little drink of water there, kind of cure some dry mouth there. When you do a lot of talking like this, sometimes you get dry, and his speech starts getting slurry. I noticed that, so it's time to take a break and get a little drink of water there. So I'm going to pick back up where I was before we took the break. I was talking about ghosts in the White House, just in case you have just tuned in. And there goes our light again. So if you're going to look at the video, you might see some brightness and dimness. We have trouble with one of the lights up here. It seems to be going off on us. I don't think it's anything paranormal, but it's just happening. And I was talking about ghosts in the White House, and I kind of stopped right at the Roosevelts. Were in the 1940s during World War II when Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt were in residence in the White House, and about Lincoln's ghost. Lincoln's ghost seemed to pop up a lot during those days. Winston Churchill seen it a lot. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, the very famous story of her encounter with Lincoln's ghost. So during their years in there, and then of course Roosevelt dies in office, and then Vice President Harry Truman takes over as president. And the very distinction that the Trumans had about living in the White House is they didn't get to live in it all that much. Of the Truman's tenure in the White House, maybe a half or a quarter of his term was actually lived in the house. Because when they first moved in, it wasn't too long after they found the house to be in horrible condition, and the ceilings and the floors were in bad shape. And as it turned out, after they did a thorough inspection of it and everything, the whole house was almost in danger of collapsing. Over the years, it had been cut into, the walls had been cut into so many different times to lay electric in 1892. Incidentally, 1892 was the first year they had electric lights on a Christmas tree in the White House. Good reason for that was there was no electricity in the White House before 1892. That would have been in the administration of Benjamin Harrison. So you cut through the walls to lay gas pipes in first for gas lighting, plumbing pipes, and then, of course, electrical wiring came in, and then over the years, the systems were changed. Gas lines were closed off. Electric was put through. The electric system had been patched and repaired through the years. Walls were cut into for different things. During the administration of Theodore Roosevelt, they actually did some major remodeling and cut into some it turned out some support beams that were very well needed, and they didn't realize it at the time. And the whole house was actually in danger of collapsing. And there was a very famous story of Margaret Truman, President Truman's daughter, her piano leg actually popping through one of the floors and going down, which actually did happen. So they decided it was time to vacate the house, and then they had to make a decision what was going to happen. Would the house just be completely torn down and a new one built in its place? And fortunately for us and for the citizens of the United States, Harry Truman had a real deep, strong, deep-seated sense of history. And he says, no, we can't do that. This house is just too historic. We have to keep what we can. So every fireplace mantel, piece of wood, trimming, doorway, everything in the house was marked, cataloged, so everything could be put back in as original as you could. The outside sandstone original walls were there. And then what they found when they started tearing things apart and going through beams and getting it back to what it was in the 18th century, they actually found some of the beams in the house charred from burns. And that was from when the British set fire to the house during the War of 1812. Oh, I left out that ghost, too. Yeah, there's a gentleman that shows up on the north portico of the White House with a torch in hand, wearing a British uniform. And a lot of times people see him out there. He's wearing the red jacket and white pants of a British War of 1812 British soldier, and he's got a torch in hands. And people think, oh, there's something going on with reenactors over there or something. They don't know what's going on. And it's a ghost of a British soldier from that era that pops up at the north portico, ready to hurl a torch into the house and set it on fire. And also the ghost of, for heaven's sakes, I forget her name, and you should know this, Surratt, Anne Surratt, the ghost of Anne Surratt shows up at the White House, and she's banging on the doors on the North Portico on July 7th. She's pleading for President Johnson, who would have been in office at that time. What they were going to do is they're going to hang her as a Lincoln conspirator. She was the only woman executed. And she's actually banging on the door. She was looking for a presidential pardon, which never happened. And her ghost does pop up on the North Portico also, too, banging on the doors. And they have a time for her. They know she shows up on July 7th, because that would have been when her mother was hanged for her part in the conspiracy of the Lincoln assassination. So a couple of ghosts there I left out. Just reminded myself of that. Anyway, back to the Truman's administration remodeling. A lot of the beams that they found that were burnt and all that were from the War of 1812. So Harry Truman had these beams all taken out, and what they did is they had walking sticks made out of them and bowls carved and different ornaments and things made, and they sold these to the public, original White House wood, original White House beams, and this actually helped raise a lot of the money for the rebuilding of the house. Because by the time the house by the time they got to it, basically pretty much what you had was the outside sandstone walls, which were original to the house when it was built in 1799 when it was started. But everything else on the inside was completely gutted, redone. Basements and sub-basements were dug and put in. All steel beaming were put in. The original wooden beams that you had in the 18th century, they never built that house anticipating all that technology would come in. So it wasn't designed to hold all the weight of electrical and gas pipes and plumbing and water pipes and all that, because that stuff didn't exist when the house was built first. So it needed a complete overhaul. So then the Trumans did come back and move in for the rest of their term in office to a completely remodeled and redone White House with complete air conditioning in it, new furnishing system, everything new. Beautiful home they moved into. And then, of course, the Eisenhowers were the next family that took over after the Trumans left. Not too much happened during the Eisenhower administration, except for Eisenhower having a stroke himself and going through some personal troubles and things. But as far as ghostly sightings and anything supernatural, it's kind of quiet. Now then, of course, the Kennedys. When the Kennedys moved in, things started shaking up again a little bit there with Lincoln's ghost and with things going on with that. And Mrs. Kennedy, of course, did a very major rehaul to the White House decor. She wanted the White House to be something of historical value, and she wanted it to be something of the people's homes, that it should be decorated with taste, and just not every administration coming in and changing things the way they want, and there should be historical pieces and things left in the rooms. And she started writing letters and getting donations of a lot of historical furniture. A lot of this stuff was brought back, donated back to the house, stuff that was sold way back in the day when Chester Alan Arthur had his big garage sale and got rid of a lot of these antiquities and a lot of these old furnishings and just had all this stuff that he considered junk sold off, and a lot of it got donated back. One of the more important purchases was the Monroe furniture. Monroe dining room set and Monroe chairs came back into the White House. And Mrs. Kennedy was very much concerned with furnishing the house with original antiques and original White House pieces, and had everything decorated very nicely. The bad thing that the Lincolns had going for them was they moved in 100 years to the day that the Lincolns did. And unfortunately for the Kennedys, the same curse that befell the Lincolns also befell them. And John Kennedy, of course, as we all know, was assassinated himself too. Many strange similarities with Lincoln Kennedy. Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. Both presidents were shot in the presence of their wives. Both were at a public function where they were out in public. Both male guests of the president's party were injured during the assassination. The governor of Texas was shot during the Kennedy administration, and Major Rathbone was stabbed in the arm by John Wilkes Booth before he leapt over during the leapt over the side of the balcony during the Lincoln assassination. So a lot of strange similarities between them. Both vice presidents were Johnson. Lincoln's vice president was Andrew Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson, Kennedy. So a lot of weird similarities to that. Both vice presidents had mothers named Hannah. Both were born in years of '08. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808, Lyndon Baines Johnson, 1908. So a lot of weird similarities between Lincoln-Kennedy assassination, so something kind of strange going on with that. Then, of course, after Kennedy, we had who? Who came after Kennedy? Was it Nixon? No, not Nixon.
Oh, Johnson.
Johnson, that's it. I forgot who was next. It was Johnson.
Right.
And during the Johnson years, I just was testing you to see if you were listening. Yeah, right. I sort of had a mind wipe out there for a second. Yeah. So during the Johnson years, one of Johnson's daughters, again, came in contact with the ghost of Willie Lincoln. She had during the night gotten hungry and decided to walk down into the kitchen to go fix herself something, which normally you would have one of the White House staff on duty. They usually have staff in the White House 24 hours, some staff to serve the first family, anything they would need, any of their personal needs or anything they would like. But she decided to go down herself, and in one of the halls, she encountered the ghost of the little boy, Willie Lincoln. She actually conversed with him, and she claimed to talk with him. And he asked her about his pony, he wanted to know about his brother, he wanted to know about his family and things that were going on. So she claimed to actually have communication with the ghost of Willie Lincoln during her administration, during the Johnson's administration. Nixon, nothing too much happened as far as ghosts. Nixon's had his own troubles with Watergate going on. He didn't need to see any ghosts. He had enough of problems when he was in the White House. But then during the administration of Ronald Reagan, they had a lot of strange things going on. Nancy Reagan became very, very much involved with the psychic mediums and things, and she came under a lot of criticism for this. She came under a lot of scrutiny, and she again was doing what Mary Todd Lincoln had done, was holding seances in the White House, was bringing in mediums and spiritualists and trying to communicate with different people and different things and seeing what was in the future for her husband. One famous high-priced, pricey Washington medium actually predicted that there would be an attempt made on the president's life, and that did happen, so she did call that one right. So we do have some psychic things happening there during the Reagan's administration. Other administrations down the line, not too much. The only first family I know that actually publicly, a lot of the first families when they leave office will say, yeah, there are haunts and things going on in the White House. Harry Truman said it for sure. He says when he was in, he says, yeah, you better believe there's ghosts in this house. There's all kind of things that go on here. But the only ones that publicly said it while they were still in office were the Obamas. Michelle Obama and President Barack Obama said, yeah, there are some strange encounters and there's some knocks on doors in the middle of the night and there's things here we just can't explain. So that's where we're kind of at with ghosts and hauntings in the White House. So a lot of stuff goes on in that White House. We have some strange things with that. Okay, before I give, boy, this one kind of quickly, I'm surprised I covered the good, well, of course we had the little break there too. What I wanted to do, and I said when we started this program, was I was going to play an old recording here. This recording is of a famous star, a 19th century opera star called Adelina Patti, Madame Adelina Patti, and she was a true opera diva. In her days, she was commanding about $5,000 or $6,000 per performance, and this was in the 1860s, 1870s, and she demanded to be paid in gold. And she got it. She got what she wanted because she was a huge star. And when she was still a teenager, in the 1860s, she did a North American tour. And of course, she didn't tour any of the southern cities because that would have been all under siege with the Civil War going on. But she did tour Boston, New York. She gave concerts there. And then en route to Canada, she stopped in Washington, D.C. and gave a concert for the Lincolns. And sang. And what she sang was a very sentimental 19th century song which was very popular during the Civil War, and it was called Home Sweet Home. And all through her life, she died in 1919, and she made these recordings in 1905 when she was in her 60s. So the recordings, she's a little past her prime, so when you listen to them, and then of course there were very old acoustic recordings with piano accompaniment, so the technology isn't really that great. So there's a little hiss and crackle and pop in some of the recordings here, and a little blast in some of her voice when she sings, because she wasn't too accustomed to the recording process. This was something she did not do. But nonetheless, she did the recordings. She recorded these for Victor Records, and the Victor technicians were able to persuade her, and of course with a lot of cash, and all under her terms. Madame Patti did not go to a recording studio to record. You brought the studio to her, and she lived in a huge castle in Wales that she had, a huge estate that she lived, I think, with her third husband there, and 18 dwarfs. I don't know what's the thing with the dwarfs, but she had like 18 dwarfs that resided there also. And you set up all the equipment there for her, and when she felt so inclined to sing, when she felt her voice was in tune, she would step in front of the recording horn and she would sing, and you would make the recordings. And if this happened to be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or at 1 o'clock in the morning, you had to be ready for her when she decided to sing. But nonetheless, she did the recordings, they pulled them off, and so we do have some recordings of the legendary Patti's voice. When the whole process was finished, she was thrilled with it, and when she heard the record, she sat there and she blew kisses into the horn and said, oh, that's it, I understand, now I know why I am Patti, I'm magnificent, and now I know why I hear my voice. So she was thrilled with it. Well, you tell me how thrilled you are when you hear this. And you got to remember, these are from 19 years old, and they're from a woman that was a famous star, but she's singing when she was in her 60s. take my nap. Okay, that was the first chorus. I think we'll stop there. You got the idea, so you can kind of hear her voice. Like I say, one of those true legendary performers that we did fortunately have some recordings of. A few stars that may have passed on that were legendary opera stars during the golden age of opera. Fortunately, Victor did do this. They paid a lot of money to do this and got some of these stars to record for them. One of them also being Francesco Tamagno, a very, very famous tenor pre-Caruso. Caruso became the very reigning tenor in his day, and they did persuade Mr. Tamagno to make a few recordings too. And then he did a few recordings for them also, the same type of thing. He brought the equipment to his home and set it up, and they were done with piano accompaniment. And he got special, salaries for doing this kind of thing. But then he passed away very young too, at age 54. Patty lived into her 70s though. She made it for a while. Incidentally, these recordings were a single-sided recording, so it's not recorded on the back of the record. It's a single-sided record. So it's just smooth on the back. It's recorded only on one side. And for a 12-inch disc like this, of maybe 4 minutes or 3.5 minutes of singing of Patty, you paid $5 for this in 1905. That was a lot of money. $5 for a disc like this was a tremendous amount of money. So it was apparently something the Victor Company was aiming at a higher audience, or people that could afford it, more like a status symbol. And she did a few of these recordings. I didn't play it all the way through because I wanted to cut that short a little bit because we're kind of running out of time here, and I wanted to tell the story of the Christmas tree ship, which I'm going to do now. Christmas tree ship is a Chicago story. It's a wonderful story, and it's local here to Chicago. Way back in the day, the year I'm going to kind of center on now is 1912. And they used to have, years ago, trees used to come to the city of Chicago by ship. Wooden sailing ships and steamships used to sail across the lake, go to Michigan. They'd spend a few weeks there cutting trees, load the ships up with trees, bring them back, and they'd bring them to the docks here in Chicago and sell. And one of the more famous ones was called the Christmas tree ship, also run by the Christmas tree captain, who was Mr. Schoenemann. Mr. August Schoenemann and Herman Schoenemann, two brothers, and they ran one of these ships out of Chicago. It was an old three-masted wooden sailing ship called the Rose Simmons, which for 1912, the ship was already old by then. It had exchanged hands a few times, and a few different people owned it and everything, and then finally the Schoenemanns got a hold of it and were using it for this. And 1912 had been kind of a tempestuous month, November in 1912, for Lake Michigan. A lot of early storms popped up on the lake, and snowstorms, rainstorms, wind, a lot of waves, that kind of thing. So it had been kind of a stormy month. But Herman Schoenemann decided he needed the extra money this year. It would be nice to do an early run with this, get the trees and beat everybody else to the punch. And they would bring their ship back and sell them off the Clark Street Bridge. People would come right onto the ship and you'd buy them there. He had a little restaurant there too. They would serve food and things. They had some lights on the ship. So it was a very festive occasion. Bands would be there playing music. And apparently he was also a very generous man too, Herman Schoenemann. He would donate trees to churches and to charities and to orphanages and things like that. So he was called the Christmas Captain. So anyway, they decided to do this run. So they went with the ship, a crew of I think maybe 7, I'm not sure exactly, maybe 7 or 8 men on the Rose Simmons. Took the ship across from Chicago, across to Michigan, stayed there for a while, cut trees, loaded the ship with a real heavy cargo of trees lashed to the ship and on the decks and everything, and then we're coming across. And en route coming across back to Chicago, they got caught in a storm. A very bad ice storm hit the lake. A lot of the trees actually weighted the ship down. A lot of ice and stuff was gathering on the trees and pulling the ship down in the lake. Their lifeboat had broken off and gotten away, so they had no way to escape. They were spotted. A lighthouse did see them from the shore and saw that they were in trouble, and they did try to send a small gasoline-powered boat out to get them aid in it, but that boat wound up having to turn around. The storm was just too severe. They did write some notes. They sent some messages in a bottle, all hope is lost, going down, sinking, God help us, nothing we can do, that kind of thing like that, and that's exactly what happened. The ship did go down, the whole crew was lost, it sank in Lake Michigan, and that was the end of that. Now, some of the supernatural tales that start with this was, number one, none of the bodies were ever retrieved. In actuality, Herman Schunemann and his wife Barbara are buried, well, he's not because his body was never found, but over in Acacia Cemetery, which is not too far away from Irving Park Road there, where we actually do the tape, when we do these shows in the studio. Our studio where we tape them from John DeVito's home, is not too far from that cemetery. It's right there close by, and that's where his gravesite is. When people do go to the gravesite where the stone is, it's got little Christmas trees on the stone, and it says Barbara Schunemann, Herman Schunemann. Of course, his date for passing away is 1912. I think Mrs. Schunemann passed away sometime in the 1930s or so. And people go there and they claim they smell trees. You can smell the faint scent of pine and evergreen trees around that gravesite. Around 1922, which are about 10 years after the disaster happened in 1912 when the ship was lost, a fishing trawler on Lake Michigan in one of their nets pulled up a wallet in a sealskin bag, and the wallet was Herman Schunemann's wallet. Had identification in it, it was in there, so for 10 years it had been down at the lake, and then it got caught in one of the nets and came up. And strangely enough, the ship that found the wallet was called the Reindeer. So the Christmas tree ship's, Christmas captain's ship, his wallet was actually found by a ship called the Reindeer. Through the years, too, trees would bob up to the surface of the water up to the Lake Michigan, and they would wash ashore in Wisconsin, wash ashore in Michigan, and people couldn't understand where these Christmas trees would pop up, and then they finally attributed it to the Christmas tree ship. From being under the water through the years, the lashings would break loose, and as those did, the ships would become untied and float up to the surface and wash ashore. There are a few shops around the area there too. They have Christmas tree stores and things, and they actually have some artifacts and ornaments and things that are made from some of these trees that washed up, and you can buy those. Some people actually even have the trees. Some of the trees that washed up, they're nothing more than just a trunk of the tree with some branches on it, but they do hang ornaments on them and anything. Supposedly these came from the Christmas tree ship. Okay, so where's the paranormal in this? Well, it's a little strange story. The bodies were never retrieved from Lake Michigan. The Captain Schunemann's body was never found. The lake claimed them. The sea claimed them, as they say. It claims it's dead. He was never buried in his grave, even though his name is on the headstone. But it is said that on Christmas Eves in the city of Chicago, you happen to be somewhere in the vicinity of Lake Michigan when the conditions are just right, and there's that little mist that comes over the lake, and that they say if you gaze out over the lake in the direction of where the old Clark Street Bridge was, where the ship would dock, you might be able to catch a glimpse of an old wooden three-masted schooner kind of sailing in, and then just sort of disappears from you. And that happens on Christmas Eve, and many people say that is the ghost ship Rose Simmons trying to finish its last run, trying to do that. So that is the end of that. We have done this, wow, and I almost did it right on time, too. Look at that. What do we got, like 2 minutes left?
3 minutes.
3 minutes left? Did we have any questions or anything from anybody up there?
No, I haven't seen any comments come through, so that's why I took the technology break to see if maybe some of the settings are off. I'll have to double check them after the show, but if you want to, we still got a few minutes if you want to play the Christmas song.
I was going to say I can wind up the old Victrola here again, and we can give you another old recording, a Caruso recording of a Christmas record from 1917.
You know, the technology is fascinating and the sound remarkable.
It is, yeah, for those days. Yeah.
What I'm looking at here, which is just as folks can see.
You have to remember, too, now these were recorded, you didn't have microphone.
Yeah, exactly.
You had a horn. You had a horn,
right.
Pretty much. Well, it would be a little different than these horns like this. These horns were a little more ornamental for the machines. It would have been in a home. You would have had more like a cone-shaped clay horn, and at the end of that would have been the recording stylus attached, and it would have been a wax record. And you would sing into the horn, and simply the vibration from your voice would cut the wax and make the record.
recorded direct to disc.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
I don't know how they reproduced them.
They had a system of mass stamping them. In the early days, when they did cylinder recordings, you didn't. What they had wax cylinders in the early days of the
Right.
infancy of the recording
Right.
industry. And what they would do is they would set up maybe 10 recording machines, and a singer would sing, and you'd do 10 records. They'd start it all over, put fresh wax cylinders on the machine, you'd see 10 more. So if you had something that might have been a popular selling recording, you had to do a lot of repeat performances until they finally found a way to mold the records and do
Right.
it. Yeah.
Well, one of these days we'll have to do a show dedicated to
Just on older recordings, huh?
to the recordings and the
Caruso
history.
recording, the Cantique de Noël, O Holy Night, from 1917. Famous, very famous opera star, Enrico Caruso. Chorus of the record there, so you kind of get the impression. Some of the fantastic singing of Caruso there, one of the golden voices. For many years, it's been argumented. They said the phonograph made Caruso, or did Caruso make the phonograph? Because he started recording very early on, 1902, 1903. He started recording. One of the Victor recording technicians, Fred Gaisberg, heard Caruso. He was touring Europe looking for stars to maybe possibly record. And this was a pretty new medium in those days. A lot of people didn't really want to do it, didn't know what they were getting into. And he heard Caruso sing in La Scala, and he says, oh, this is it, we've got to get this guy. So he promised him a salary, and then he sent a cable back to the offices at Victor Records, and he said, nope, your fee is too exorbitant, we forbid you to record. He overstepped him and said, nope, this is just too good a voice to pass up. I'm going to record him. So they went to his hotel in Italy, set up the recording equipment, and in the one afternoon, they made the 10 discs, and they became legendary. And of course, Caruso became an exclusive Victor artist. His recording contract, he signed an exclusive contract with Victor Records, which would have taken him to 1933, but he died in 1921, and he died before Electric. Electric recordings started coming out in 1925, so all of his were recorded acoustically. And this recording of the Cantique de Noël, or O Holy Night, happens to be from 1917. So by this time, the acoustic recordings were getting pretty good. They were getting a little better, and the clearer sound, the material in the records was getting better. So the fidelity was becoming a little better. They were improving along the way. So it sounds a little better than the Paddy record from 1905. Of course, the voice is a little different too. Okay, folks, that's about all we have for all of this. I hope you enjoyed this. It was a joy for me to do this. I enjoy doing it. We'll be back in the studio next month doing a show. Everyone say a little prayer for John DeVita, that he's a speedy recovery from his knee surgery and from everything. And just have a wonderful, joyous Merry Christmas and a wonderful, super good Happy New Year. And we'll see you all next year. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you.